I have carried this story a long time, 23 years, near enough, and I still think on it every January when the wind comes down off the pine ridge and throws itself against the Waystation walls like something that means to get inside. It reminds me of what I almost let happen that morning, and of the man who would not. My name is Cass Whitfield. I kept Coulter's Ford Waystation from 1871 to 1894, and in all those years only one night shamed me so deep I never spoke of it until the people involved gave me leave. That was the night of the 14th of January, 1878, when a woman named Olive Vane and her daughter came in out of a blizzard, and a committee of 4 men and my own silence nearly drove them back out into it. She arrived at 4:30 in the afternoon, the storm already thick and the pass road turning treacherous. Her horse had thrown a shoe somewhere above the first bend and was listing badly on the left foreleg. She knocked at the station door holding a carpet bag and a child of 6 by the hand, and what I saw when I opened up was a woman who was tired clear through, but had not decided to show it to anyone. Her coat was thin for January. Her face was composed. Her name was Olive Vane. She was a widow. Her husband, a surveyor named Thomas, had died of fever the previous July, and she was making for her brother-in-law's claim in Ridgeline County, another 2 days' ride on a sound horse in fair weather. She asked if I had a room, and whether I could stable her mare and look at the hoof. I had both. She paid me what I asked without complaint, and took the smaller room at the back with little Bess, and that was all the trouble she gave anyone. There were 6 other travelers staying that night. 4 of them I want to tell you about. Pell was their head, a heavy-set man who ran some manner of cattle brokerage and had opinions about everything and the volume to share them. He called himself the informal committee man of any room he happened to occupy, and there were men who let him. His 3 companions were less memorable, followers by nature, the kind who take the shape of the vessel they're poured into. The 5th traveler was Boone Harder. I knew Boone by reputation before I knew him to speak to. He ran a spread up on the backside of the Pine Ridge, maybe 400 acres of good mountain grass, a sound cabin, a barn he'd built himself over 2 winters. He was known in 2 counties for being square dealing, for paying his debts to the day and expecting the same, and for saying very little that was not worth saying. He was wide through the shoulders and quiet in a way that was not empty, the way a well-built wall is quiet, which is to say that it has weight behind it. He came to the station about an hour after Olive, stamped the snow off his boots, said good evening to me, and took a chair near the stove with a cup of coffee, and nothing else required of the evening. The brooch went missing sometime between supper and the morning. It belonged to a rancher's wife out of Greeley, who was traveling with her husband. A garnet piece, small but dear to her, and she was certain she had set it on the windowsill of the common room the night before. In the morning it was gone. She was distressed. Her husband was louder than distressed. Pell made himself useful. I was in the kitchen when it began, but I heard it through the thin wall, and I am not proud of what I did about it, which was nothing for too long. Pell had decided, and announced his decision to the room as though it were a verdict from a bench, that the brooch had been taken by the widow in the back room. She was a stranger. She had come in alone. She was traveling without a man to vouch for her. He recited these facts as though they were evidence, and the rancher's husband nodded along because he wanted his wife's brooch back, and Pell was offering him someone to blame for its absence. By the time I came through the kitchen door, Pell had 3 men behind him, and the door to the back hallway open. He intended to wake Olive Vane and her daughter before dawn and put them out. Her horse was lame. The pass was still blowing. The temperature had not climbed above 4 degrees since midnight. I knew all of this, and I stood in my own station and looked at Pell and said nothing that stopped him. Boone Harder put down his coffee cup. He did it quietly, the way he did everything, setting it on the side table with a small click that I heard plainly in the silence that followed. He stood up and he walked to the hallway door, and he stood in it. "She's not going anywhere," he said. Pell blinked. He was not accustomed to opposition that came this calmly. "That woman took the Dellingham piece," he said. "We have a right to—" "You have a right to nothing except what I'm about to show you." Boone looked at me then, and I will tell you that look cost me something, because it saw exactly what I had done and had not done, and it did not excuse any of it. Then he crossed the room to the coat pegs by the outer door, and he lifted Pell's saddlebag off the peg where it had hung since the previous afternoon. He opened the outer pocket. He set the garnet brooch on the table beside his coffee cup. The sound in that room was nothing. Pure nothing. Pell said he didn't know how it had gotten there. He said it a second time, with more words, and then a third time differently arranged. Boone let him finish. He didn't raise his voice once. And he didn't need to. He looked at the rancher's husband, and at the 3 followers behind Pell, and at me, each in turn, long enough for each of us to understand where we stood in the account of that morning. Then he picked up his hat from the hook. "I'll see her to the Ridge Road," he said to me. "Her horse can't make the pass. She can ride north on mine, and I'll come back for it in the week." He knocked at the back room door himself. I heard him speak to Olive Vane, low, plain words, no preamble about what had just occurred in the common room, only that her horse couldn't travel, and that the storm had broken to the north, and he had a property up on the ridge, and a barn with room, and she and her daughter were welcome to stay until the road to Ridgeline was passable. She could decide freely. That was the first and last thing he said about it. I could not hear what she answered, but I heard Bess, the little girl, say something that made him laugh once. A quiet sound I did not think Boone Harder made very often. 15 minutes later, they were out the door and into the gray morning. Olive on his horse, with Bess in front of her, Boone leading them up the north trail on foot, like it was nothing to him to walk 3 miles uphill in January snow. I have thought many times about what I should have said and done before he stood up. I think about it still. Now I will tell you what I know of the weeks that followed, because Olive Vane herself told me most of it, the following April, when she came back through Coulter's Ford on her way south rather than east. Boone Harder's place was a working ranch, well kept, with a main cabin of hewn log that was larger than it looked from the trail, 2 rooms and a loft, a stone hearth, a cook stove that heated the whole structure when it was going properly. He had a part-time hand named Ridley, who came Tuesdays and Fridays, and otherwise the place ran on Boone himself. There were horses, cattle on the lower pasture, chickens in a small coop off the barn. A life fully built, Olive said, but quiet in the way a house is quiet when it has been a long time without voices in it. He gave her the loft for herself and Bess. He did not make conversation unless she invited it. He did his work, and she did hers. The cooking, the indoor tasks, what she could manage of the outdoor ones that did not require his height or his strength. And they fell into the days of a shared life without either of them naming it as such. It was Bess who knocked it loose first, the way children do. By the second week she was following Boone from the barn to the woodpile and back, asking him the name of everything she saw and expecting a straight answer, which he gave her. He showed her how to feed the chickens without scattering the grain so wide it drew the fox. He lifted her up to see into the hayloft because she asked him to. He put her on the back of the gentlest horse on the property and walked her around the paddock in a slow circle while she held the mane with both hands and said nothing, very seriously, the way 6-year-olds are serious about things that matter to them. Olive watched all of this. She was not a woman who required a man's protection, she told me plainly. She had managed since July on her own wits, and she had intended to go on managing. But she watched Boone Harder carry Bess back inside on his shoulders one cold afternoon, because the child had tired on the path from the barn, and she said something shifted in her that afternoon that she had not expected and could not entirely account for. He was not tender in any way she had anticipated. He did not say gentle things. He brought in wood without being asked, and left it stacked neatly by the hearth. He noticed when her coffee was low, and refilled it before she mentioned it. He sat with Bess in the evenings and listened to her recite what she'd learned that day with the patience of a man who has nowhere more important to be. Small things, she told me. They added up. February went. The worst of the cold broke in early March, and the road north began to clear. There was a week in the middle of March when Olive said she woke each morning, expecting that day to be the day she would tell him she was ready to move on, and each morning she did not. She knew what she was waiting for, she said, but she would not say it first. That was not pride, she told me. It was that she needed to know he saw her, truly saw her, the whole of her situation, and was choosing it clear-eyed. He asked her on the 15th of April. He did it at the woodpile, which she said was entirely in keeping with his character. He was splitting and she was carrying, and he stopped and set the axe down and looked at her, the way she'd seen him look at a fence line he was deciding whether to move, measuring, honest, without any pretense of not doing it. He said the road to Ridgeline was passable, and he would get her a sound horse and provisions enough for the journey, if she wanted them. He said that straight, first, so she knew the door was open. Then he said his piece was this. The place was better with her and Bess in it, and he was not going back to the way it had been before they came, if she would consider staying, and he would not ask her for anything she hadn't freely decided to give. She told me she stood there a moment with an armload of split pine and considered him. She said he looked exactly as he had in the doorway at Coulter's Ford, a man planted in a place with full knowledge of what he was doing and why. She said she set the wood down on the stack and brushed the bark dust off her coat, and told him she had considered it. They were married in June by the circuit preacher, in the yard of the Harder Ranch, with Ridley and the circuit preacher's wife as witnesses, and Bess, in a dress Olive had sewn from cloth Boone had brought back from Alderley, without being asked. The brooch, the little garnet piece that had started everything, was never spoken of again in that house, because there was no need. I know all of this, because Olive told it to me herself, that April day she came back through Coulter's Ford, heading south instead of east, not to Ridgeline County, but to collect the last of her things from a cousin in Cutter's Bend, before she settled permanently on the ridge. She stopped in to thank me, which I did not deserve. She said Boone had told her what happened in the common room, what he'd found and where, and what I had not done before he stood up. I expected the weight of that to come out in her voice. It didn't. She was a woman who knew how to leave things where they belonged. She only told me that I ought not to spend the rest of my life on it, because Boone had, and that was enough. I have not spent the rest of my life on it, but I think about it every January. I think about a man who put down a coffee cup in a quiet room and stood in a doorway, and the woman and child who were on the other side of it. I think about what a small thing a door is, and what a large thing it is to stand in one. Boone Harder never said much about what he did or what he built after. He was not the kind of man who talked about the worth of his own acts. But on the last day I saw him, a Tuesday in the fall, years later, when he came through Coulter's Ford with Bess, grown near to a young woman by then, and the two youngest from the years after, he looked like a man who had built something that held. That is the whole of what I have to tell.